About 20 years ago, as of the time of this writing, I signed up for a ballroom class at Arizona State University because I needed a few extra credits. I also figured I would meet some cute girls and boost my GPA, so between that or a philosophy class, I chose dance. At that time, I was an English and music theory double major, and I thought that I was going to be a school teacher. Boy, was I wrong. The Bible reminds us in many places that many are the plans of man, but it is the will of the Lord that stands. See Proverbs 19, verse 21, and James 4, verse 13 through 15. A few months later, I was finishing my Ballroom 101 class and had to go out to a local salsa club for our, quote, final exam, which consisted basically of getting a card stamped that I went dancing. Easy enough, but unbeknownst to me, that night was not a final exam, but rather the beginning of a life's journey with many twists and turns. See what we did there? Anyway, after finally getting the courage to ask this girl to dance with me, that journey began. Within a few minutes, she peeled my hands off of her like I was some cheap packaging tape and shook her head in disgust, walking off the floor because of my incapability to lead and to keep time. At about 19, young and full of pride, this little event was the catalyst for channeling all of my Type A Eastern European perfectionism into what would eventually develop to be a unique and fulfilling career. It would also be the way that God would use something incredibly foolish, like the superficial world of competitive ballroom dancing and my desire for recognition, to teach me how to read and study the Bible with discernment. Although I've done many artistic things in my life, I don't think I'm particularly talented at one thing or another. I have had a very special and unique education, and I'm also good at seeing patterns. I'm also insatiably curious, and I've asked why about everything since I could talk. So then, what matters more in life is that we connect to these childlike qualities, more so than any given talent or intelligence or anything else. With all that out of the way, my journey began very quickly. The following semester, I would take 3 dance courses, attend my first competition, and join the ASU Latin performance team. Later that year, I would travel across the country to national competitions with the team, and a year after that, I started dumping tons of money into private instruction. A year or two after that, I created a collegiate ballroom dance club and was organizing yearly events. As president of the Devil Dance Sport Club, I also began teaching the workshops at the gym and motivating people to get better and train hard. I would bring in high-level coaches, and I would have regular meetings with my board, many of the policies, practices, and vision of which still govern the club today many years later. After graduating college, I interned at a local dance studio, and then I tried to run my own business with some of the kids from ASU as my teachers. The idea was cool, but it failed miserably, and eventually I ended up working for a franchise-style family-owned place. I worked there for about 7 years, grossing probably about $500,000 in sales, and teaching over 10,000 lessons to students of all ages from 8 all the way to 80. Most of my students were not natural-born dancers, and it forced me to learn how to break things down and explain the basic components of something so that someone could learn. It's funny because I actually hated teaching beginners at first. I wanted to work with really talented people, competitive dancers, people with energy and desire. That doesn't pay the bills though, because self-motivated people don't need lots of dance lessons. It is the people who struggle being motivated, who aren't talented, who don't identify as dancers, that need the work. As Christ said, He came to call the sinners to repentance, not the righteous, because the healthy do not have a need for a physician. As is typical of life lessons, we always get the opposite of what we want so we can learn something important. For me, it was patience, compassion, and the basics. Today, I actually prefer to work with people who aren't talented, who are beginners, who are scared, who are new, and who do not identify as the outcome of a given thing. It is much more rewarding to me to mold that kind of clay than to take something that's already molded and just sprinkle some pizzazz here and there. But I digress. Throughout my career, I had some students that would stay for a few weeks and others that stayed for many years. I competed nationally with my students and they generally did well, and I also competed professionally and was moderately successful in my division. Competitive dancing is a rat race, and because judging is totally subjective, and many of the judges are also competition organizers and coaches, you can imagine what kind of rat race it really is. I worked really hard at what I did, often spending 50 to 60 hours a week at the studio training, teaching, or whatever else. It was a consuming industry, and I had no interest or energy for anything else, let alone reading the Bible or a relationship with God. Yet in this we see the wisdom of God. You never know how He will choose to act and what methods He will choose to use to accomplish His purposes. God can do anything, which is a profound thought in and of itself. And the mystery of life is that even when we are completely headed in the wrong direction from our perspective, from His perspective, everything is being worked for the good. In the end, God liberated me from that situation, one step at a time, one relationship at a time, one life lesson at a time. Nevertheless, I realized many years later that my adventure as a professional competitor and instructor prepared me uniquely for what I do today in ways that seminary or formal education could never have even come close. This is the wisdom of God. I hope that this inspires you so that when you look at your own life, you do not discount the journey that God has put you on, even though it may not make complete sense right now. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 27 says that God uses the foolish things to shame the wise. And Romans 8 verse 28 through 30 reminds us God works all things for the good, regardless of our first-person perspective. So I hope that my gleanings will be an interesting adventure for you too. This will be like taking a high-level dance lesson, except over the internet. So let's have some fun. The physical and the spiritual. One of the foundations of what we will discuss today is that the physical world reflects spiritual principles. Psalm 19 beautifully describes this. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims His handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words, whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all of the earth, and their words to the end of the world. Verses 1 through 4. God created the world and it was good. But have you ever asked yourself, why was it good? The reason is because God is good, and creation is a reflection of the Creator. That means that by studying the physical world and its properties, we can discern wisdom about God. This is especially true if you work at a job that requires understanding physical principles. And in my case, this was especially accurate because I studied movement and physical relationships every single day. We would often joke around and say that dancing is a vertical expression of a horizontal desire. But in fact, dancing is a beautiful expression of the laws of the universe. Everything follows the dance of life, from the birds and flowers to the bees and the trees. Biology, physics, chemistry, language, music, and relationships, all of these things are a dance between complementary opposites. This is how God designed things. He designed them to dance, to move, to oscillate, to play, to conflict, all to the music of life where He is the DJ. Having studied the principles of dancing for many years, it became plainly obvious to me that what I was learning could be applied to the internal world of the mind. The world we can see is there to help us understand the world we cannot see. And in this way, dancing was the perfect discernment training because of the things that I'll share with you today. Dynamic balance and the narrow road. Nothing in nature stands still. Things are always moving, changing, growing, and dying. Yet nature is incredibly balanced and harmonious. This is because balance is not a static picture like we tend to think of it as, but a moving and dynamic picture over time. It is not the scales coming even that determines balance, but a juggler maintaining his or her rhythm. When you walk, believe it or not, you're actually falling forward. In order to begin moving anywhere, you have to fall off balance. This in and of itself is a great lesson for all the perfectionists out there or the shy types. Creating anything or starting a new journey will always require imbalance. If you're not willing to go off balance, you will never get anything meaningful accomplished. With that in mind, there is a difference between walking like a klutz and walking like a runway model. Don't even ask me how many times I would have to teach women how to find their runway strut, sometimes in heels. So, what does this have to teach us? It tells us that once we begin to move, we need to maintain that movement. How do we maintain the movement? The answer is dynamic balance. Your body does this naturally when you walk and swing your arms in opposition of each other. If you were to walk like a penguin or Frankenstein, i.e. swinging the same arm and leg at the same time, we would think that's really funny or probably a serious problem, because the mind is trained to recognize coordinated effort and dynamic balance and grace. But balance while you're moving happens because of the opposing dance of your arms. And if you were to learn how to dance, that opposing movement becomes more grandiose and coordinated and intentional. Watch any high-level dance competition, and you will see massive opposition within a dancer's body through their various choreographies. It's why I was such in good shape dancing. The whole body is always twisting against itself and creating internal strength through dynamic balance. That physical idea now leads us to a spiritual one, which is that all spiritual principles have a dance of life embedded within them. In 1 Corinthians 6 verse 20, Paul reminds the Corinthians that they were bought for a price, which is the foundation for the imperative of not dishonoring the church with sexual immorality and other grievous sins. Yet, in Ephesians 1 verse 14, Paul reminds us that the Spirit we have from God is a guarantee that God will resurrect us and preserve our faith from apostasy. A similar dance of life can be seen in Philippians 2 verses 12 through 13, where the imperative is to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, one side of the dance, and then it is immediately followed by a qualifier that God is actually the one working through you for his good pleasure, which is the other side of the dance. It is in this way that we can discover the narrow road. The gospel is very simple, yet it is also a profound and mysterious dance between two perspectives, the God view and the man view. On one level, we make choices and are urged to run the race and confirm our election. And on another level, it is God who is doing this work according to his predestined plan to glorify himself. These two things seem like they're opposing to one another, yet they're actually complementary, and this is the dance. It is through studying these dualistic principles in the physical world that my senses were finely tuned. If it's one thing I've studied, it is balance. I have a keen eye for telling when somebody is physically off balance. And interestingly enough, this experience translated pretty well when I began studying the Bible to spiritual imbalances. At first, I didn't know very much, but I did have this quote-unquote sixth sense developed pretty well. God used this sense to guide my learning so that I could extract what was good and observe when a particular pastor or teacher had a theological imbalance that was not consistent with everything else. Over time, as I honed my basics, just like in dancing, my technique and understanding grew, and I could handle more difficult choreography. The narrow road exists in every place, and I talk about it quite a bit. In salvation, it is a dance between personal responsibility and God's predestined outcome, which frames all things. With the Sabbath, it is a dance between not being dismissive of God's special day, while also not becoming a legalist. With translations, it is a dance between literal and dynamic equivalence. In cosmology, it is rejecting Roman Catholic heliocentrism while avoiding the controlled opposition of the quote-unquote flat earth movement. It's always like this, and my goal has been to impart this sense of discernment to others through the work that I do because I think it's uniquely valuable in today's world of massive deception. Another reason why this narrow road understanding is important is because the devil is a master of duality and uses it constantly to throw you either to the left or to the right. Politics are an easy example, and the countless dialectical schemes that I've discussed in my various series and news coverage episodes offer ample evidence of this strategy. The Bible says over a dozen times to not swerve either to the left nor to the right. So, this is why understanding dynamic balance, the dance of life, and how these things apply to the narrow road is so valuable. The 4 phases of movement. All things follow predictable phases and cycles, because the universe is crafted with wisdom and beauty in mind. The world is rhythmical and dualistic, and that means things often come in pairs or multiples of 2 that move and dance over a period of time. With movement, all movement follows the same general sequence of 4 phases: stillness, readiness, momentum, and relaxation. In order to move in any new direction, you must first be still. An object in motion stays in motion unless it is acted upon. If you're driving a car at 80 miles an hour and take a sharp turn, it's not going to end well. These things are pretty obvious, but don't let that fool you. The obvious often has very deep lessons to offer us if we put our mind to the situation. You cannot change your direction in life, emotionally, spiritually, financially, and so on, unless you find stillness and stop the previous momentum. In that stillness, you will find God, in the secret place, in prayer, in the quiet walks outside that remind you of His glory. God is being itself, and rest is consistently identified with God throughout the Bible. Therefore, in order for us to move in a new direction, we first need to find this rest. This can be understood on a general level of being born again and entering God's rest through Christ, but it can also be understood in the daily battles of our lives and the constant momentum that we're dealing with that either pulls or pushes us off the narrow road. Once you are still, the next phase of movement is readiness. In the physical world, this is assuming a readiness posture. A great example here is a dog, like when you're about to kick a ball in the air. You see them putting their weight forward, their paws dig into the floor, and their eyes open wide in delight at what's about to happen. If only we could be a little more like dogs sometimes, right? Always full of joy and ready to play. Readiness is a consistent message throughout the Bible, especially the New Testament, and the many warnings it has to stay awake spiritually. The writers of the Gospels and letters, along with Jesus, all taught that the end had come and that we were in the last days. The gospel is going out into the world, Satan has been judged, and Jesus will return soon to destroy this system once and for all. We who are faithful must remain in a readiness posture until that time, engaged and ready for what is to come. Readiness, when properly executed, naturally leads to the next phase, which is momentum. There is an element of courage that is required to jump off of the branch, but with proper alignment, it is much easier to jump. Still, it's a dance between being prepared and also tossing concerns to the wind when it's time to go. So, readiness to momentum by default requires an understanding of both patience and courage. In our walk with Christ, that momentum is the race we must run until the end. Once we're born again, we begin being conformed to the image of Christ. This spiritual realignment puts us in a readiness posture, gives us new discernment, new desires, new friends, and a new use of our gifts, all of which self-reinforce to create a new direction and new momentum. Maintaining momentum is very important, because most people start something and they do not finish it. The parable of the sower is perhaps the best example, where 3/4 of the seeds show no fruit and half of them were false starts. The New Testament has much to say about false converts, so we are urged to confirm our election and to run the race to its end. But running a physical race, especially a marathon, is not about how fast you are, but about your ability to sustain the dynamic balance of your body over long distances. This is a dance of maintaining proper cadence, hydration breaks, focus, and many other things. With dancing, it's even more complicated, and with the invisible world of the mind, it is even more so because you can't see the race. So the narrow road and dynamic balance principles we discussed previously are key to maintaining this race. But momentum eventually achieves the desired result, and it's time for the 4th phase, which is relaxation. Relaxation is the necessary step between a previous phase of action and a new direction. Again, you can't go 80 miles an hour and jerk your wheel for a U-turn because it just won't end well. That momentum has to go somewhere, so you slow down. This is no different in the spiritual realm. On a grand level, this final phase is what we'll experience when Jesus returns. With evil and death and suffering all gone, and the world and our bodies totally renewed, we can finally relax. What a thought, and what a hope. But until then, there is a race to be run, and you can't always run. Sometimes you have to take breaks for water, snacks, maybe crying, or simply enjoying the view while you walk and recover your breath. This is why it's important to have a habit of prayer, keeping the Sabbath, and learning to relax so that you can redirect your mind back to God when the world directs it into its own momentum. So then, what do we have? Stillness, readiness, momentum, relaxation. Commit them to memory and notice how everything works this way. Some things have greater phases of stillness or readiness than others, while others have greater momentum phases. Bamboo, for example, can take years before it does anything, and then suddenly it grows super fast. In fact, it's not doing nothing all those years, but rather growing deep roots, preparing its readiness posture so it can shoot into a powerful momentum phase. Nature has countless such lessons, so make it a habit to find them because they will offer you delightful pictures of God's wisdom. Lead and follow. A principle of the created world is that all things are related to each other. This is called interdependence, and it's a beautiful thing. Of course, all things are dependent on God, and He is the only truly independent variable, but the dance of life around us is ultimately one of lead and follow between interlocking and interdependent partners. Leadership is a favorite topic of mine, and in my dance lessons, I always enjoyed discussing leadership principles through the lens of movement. For example, one important quality of a leader is to listen. Leadership is often associated to boldness or action, but in reality, these things comprise a small percentage of good leadership. Most of the time, it is the less obvious work of patience, listening, and waiting for the right timing to lead. This is the same in dancing as it is in life. Timing is everything. Another important aspect of leadership is that all leaders must learn to follow. Lead and follow are not static roles that exist in a vacuum, but rather dynamically exchanging complementary opposites that move in unison with one another through time. A good leader is a good follower, and guess what? A good follower is also a good leader. Just as a leader must learn to follow by listening and waiting, as well as ultimately learning to follow God, who is the ultimate leader, so too does a good follower need to learn to take the lead. But how does that work? In dancing, we have a principle called finishing the movement. This doesn't mean completing the action, like step over this foot or put your hand out here and so on. It means doing it with passion. Whatever you're going to do, really finish it with power and grace. Do it well. Be excellent. Give energy and attention into that movement until the very last drop. Both lead and follow must finish their movements, which means both lead and follow must have readiness postures and be engaged mentally in what they're doing. When I went to a Tony Robbins seminar one time, he would keep the room at like 65 degrees so that everybody would be in readiness posture. He would also have people stand up and engage physically with what he was doing, because the only way you'll taste something new is when you have the courage to put your all into it. These types of performance skills and standards may seem foreign to the average person, but I will remind you now of Jesus' words to the final church of Revelation, Laodicea, which we are in today. And to the angel of the church in Laodicea write, the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of God's creation. I know your works, you are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm, and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing, not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich, and white garments so that you may clothe yourself, and the shame of your nakedness may not be seen, and salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see. Those whom I love I reprove and discipline, so be zealous and repent. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him, and he with me. The one who conquers, I will grant him to sit with me on my throne, as I also have conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Revelation 3:14-22. In an interesting contrast to the many times the Bible warns of swerving off the narrow road either to the right or to the left, Jesus warns our lukewarm church of apathy. He counsels us to pursue spiritual excellence through embracing trials and wisdom in God, so that we can truly be wealthy. This to me is an invitation to dance, and to play our part as the followers by performing with excellence rather than sitting on the sidelines of life. There are many lessons in leading and following, probably enough for a whole book. What matters is realizing that life is a dance, and that dance is between surrendering and taking responsibility. Wisdom is discerning when one is appropriate over the other, and skill is being able to do both with excellence. The importance of wisdom. By wisdom, God created the world, and Jesus Christ is the wisdom of God made manifest. Wisdom is very important to glean in life, much more important than knowledge. If you had a piece of paper, knowledge would be like taking a pen and putting little dots on the paper. The more dots, the more things you know. Wisdom is taking your pen and connecting all of those dots to one another in as many ways as they can be possibly connected, seeing the patterns and seeing beyond the dots to something more profound. The Bible is full of great wisdom, and from my experience in dancing, I was able to discern many valuable things from it. Previously, I discussed the principle of interdependence, and one thing I didn't mention is how that applies to Bible study. The adage, context is king, is true because of interdependence. Reading in context is a matter of wisdom, not of knowledge. Many people memorize Bible verses, but few actually understand how to connect them to one another and use them in context. This is because interdependence is not immediately obvious. It takes patience, focus, detail-orientedness, and a curiosity for more than just the surface-level things of life. Timing is also a matter of wisdom. In dancing, timing is everything, and in life, the timing of things reveals God's infinite wisdom. We must time things properly in life in order to achieve the best result. And in fact, the book of Proverbs has a lot of material on this exact idea. There is a time to act and a time not to act. There is a time to relax and find stillness, and there is a time to align for readiness and strike. Not understanding when to do what is often the root of many problems and injuries. Wisdom also carries the implication of maturity. As we are conformed to the image of Christ, we gain spiritual maturity and go deeper into our studies, into our walk, into our prayer, and into our trust of God when things fall apart. It is a constant journey, but it is one of wisdom. In my 15-year professional career, I had 3 major partnerships, and by the end of the second one, I wanted to retire. It was then that my last partnership came, a short but intense ride with a great dance partner. It was ironic because I had chased a partnership like that for my entire career, only to get it at the end when I was done with dancing. Poetic, in some sense, because it showed me the futility of worldly desire and chasing after things that pass away. Desire is not bad if it's anchored in God, who is endless and can satisfy, but most of the time our desires are anchored in worldly things, and this is why we suffer, and also why wisdom is necessary to mature. Yet wisdom only comes through trials and tribulations. Connecting those dots on your paper doesn't come by default. You have to engage with what you know and try and fail and win and lose and just keep going. If it's one thing I learned through my competitive career, it was persistence. I had to dance all day, even when I would be exhausted, and still smile and pretend I was having the time of my life. At a competition, I would have dozens of entries with students, each requiring me to be completely consistent in my emotions and physical energy. And then afterward, I'd have to muster up the strength to compete on a professional level and pretend none of those hours of dancing ever happened. It was a constant exercise of pushing past my mental limitations and learning the do-or-die mentality, all of which served to help me do all of the entrepreneurial things I did later. I believe that persistence is one of the most important keys of success, both with your walk with Christ and in all of the things that you do until He returns. Sometimes you have to, quote, fake it till you make it, but persistence is worth it. What is more important than persistence, though, is having a clearly defined why as to why you do what you do. Most people are aimless, without a connection to God or their purpose in serving others, and as a result, they live mundane lives in lukewarm water, neither hot nor cold, and just getting by. Don't be like most people, because Jesus calls you for spiritual excellence and contribution to others. So then, we must develop a relationship to the Word every single day, so that our why can give us strength to persevere during more challenging parts of this ride. In dancing, we always had the floor and the mirror as our guides. The mirror shows you how you look, and the floor tells you whether you are a pretender or not. What do I mean by that? Well, striking a pose is something that anybody can do, but true confidence comes with really feeling your weight and knowing how to move. Striking poses is easier. Moving with grace and power takes pain and time. So both the mirror and the floor have their purposes. It's a dance, like all things. Too much focus on the mirror and you're going to get vain. Too much focus on the floor and you will feel much better than you actually look. In the spiritual world, the floor is the rock, the foundation you build your life on. If you do not have a connection to the floor, to the rock, then you'll get shaken by every little imbalance or someone getting up in your space. The mirror, by contrast, is the external world, the physical reality that you must engage as a sojourning son or daughter of Abraham that is in the world but not part of it. We have to do things here. We have to have appointments, coordinate things, go to work, buy groceries, work out, take care of our pets or kids or family, and whatever other things that we have to do to toil under the sun. The Bible does not call you to join a monastery and fast all day. Rather, it calls you to be among the world and spread the gospel and love your neighbor. This choreography is mastered by your relationship to the floor, which is the rock, and your engagement of the world through practical living. Another aspect of wisdom is integrity, because both wisdom and integrity go hand in hand. You cannot be wise and also a liar or a thief, although many liars and thieves misuse knowledge to their own destruction. Nevertheless, integrity is central to the Christian walk, and it is an ongoing practice. In the physical world, the integrity of an object is its degree of stability or unification. If something has great integrity, it's stable, consistent, and strong. If a building doesn't have integrity, it's going to be dangerous. The same is with people. Integrity is a factor of your consistency. Moral integrity is whether you are consistent in your morality, but this is more than morals that we're talking about here. Having integrity is a matter of keeping your word. What do you say to others? What do you say to yourself? Also, probably the most important, what do you say to God? Boy, that's a thought, isn't it? These three areas of promises are where our confidence is created or destroyed. If you break your promises to others, yourself, and certainly to God, you will feel shame, guilt, regret, fear, anxiety, and you're going to shrivel away at the enemy's accusations in your mind. But if you keep your promises as much as possible, you will grow into a strong oak with deep roots because you will gain integrity. In dancing, I had to have both physical and spiritual integrity in all that I did. Physically speaking, posture was a key element for keeping my body in integrity, because sloppy posture leads to sloppy movements, which then leads to losing energy and even a potential injury. As in dancing, so in life. So, draw the conclusions you want from that picture. Because I'm a man, the added layer of leading also required physical integrity, in the sense of being stable for my partners, sending clear signals, building trust in challenging movements, having a strong core, and so on. Again, draw whatever spiritual conclusions you want from that picture because there are many. But I also had to practice emotional and spiritual integrity. Emotionally, I was in a position to take advantage of a lot of people. Women would often come in during major transitions in their lives, seeking confidence and a healthy relationship with a male figure that would support them. Dance offers both physical support through the trust of partnered movement and emotional support in having a partner, a coach, and a confidant that you can spend time with. Unfortunately, the dance industry is not free of predatory practices just like anywhere else. So, moral integrity is very important, and learning how to gauge emotions so that they're not too cold nor too hot was a constant practice. Of course, performing also required constant integrity awareness. Especially with students who needed their emotions stabilized, I had to always be an anchor for them that was consistent in absolutely everything that I did. Otherwise, they would panic. I could show no hint of anxiety or anger or any imbalance, otherwise they would pick up on it. This is why I became so detail-oriented about everything having to do with my message and branding. It's about consistency, which builds trust, which in turn produces integrity. Lastly, there's this old adage that someone once told me, and it goes something like this. You can't keep a happy student, and you can't keep an unhappy student. In other words, you are not in control of who comes into your life, only the excellence with which you serve them with. I'll say that one more time. You are not in control of who comes into your life, only the excellence with which you serve them with. So, do not let external factors move you off of your spot, but, just like that oak tree, Dig your roots deep into the ground and do your work well where you're at. Do not get attached, remembering God is the one who appoints all things. Yet also engage fully with what is before you and do it well. This is how you will build an integral life full of great memories. The basics. The last bit I'll share with you is about the importance of the basics. Too often we focus on the shiny result instead of the steps in between that are often boring and unnoticeable. An avalanche is pretty impressive, but nobody seems to notice the trillions of snowflakes that all piled on top of each other, one after the other before the avalanche. Well, God notices, because he crafts each snowflake individually, but I think we should try to notice too. Then we would learn some valuable things. Everything in life has its basic components. Dance is full of various distinctions of how to move the body, the feet, the hands, the face, and so on. This taught me to be detail-oriented, but also to isolate the fundamental thing at play so that others could follow suit. Working on the wrong things, having the wrong priorities or values, this is how you waste time and resources. When I made money and worked a lot as a dance teacher, I barely achieved anything meaningful in the grand scheme of things. Yet, despite struggling with inconsistent energy levels, poor sleep, poor finances, and even losing my voice for 9 months, and I'm still recovering, God has done more for me and through me since 2021 than I did in 15 years of grinding all day, every day. This is why I speak about alignment and the importance of focusing on the right things. Understanding how to break things down to their basic components is vital. Otherwise, you will be easily distracted and overwhelmed. But if you do understand your basics, you can focus on the right things and use your time wisely. If alignment is present, movement is natural. This is another golden nugget derived from the world of dance. So then, learn to hone your basics and success will come naturally. In Jesus' day, kids had the Torah memorized. Repetition and practice of the right things was a part of daily life. They say practice makes perfect, but the truth is that practice makes permanent. You are what you repeatedly do, so make sure you're doing it right. But life itself is a practice, so be less concerned with the momentary ups or downs, and rather whether or not you get back up after falling, or whether you show up to the studio the next day after a competition. This is what divides the pretenders from the contenders. Last but not least, here's a simple idea. Life is in the movement. All things that stop moving die. So then, we must embrace this dance of life and move. Do not be stagnant. God is a mover, a doer, a worker. History reveals God's profound involvement in the timeline of creation, and it also reveals his sovereignty through Bible prophecy so that we can rest from our moving around in this crazy life. Nevertheless, life is meant to be lived and done. So do not forget to embrace the movements to their fullest, whatever music might be playing. I hope this was an edifying internet dance lesson for you, as I shared with you some of the most profound lessons of my 20 years of experience in a unique and beautiful life path that God provided for me ultimately to discover him and his word. Truly, he uses the foolish things to shame the wise, because ballroom dancing has nothing to do with the Bible. And yet, in my life, it was the best training for spiritual principles, discernment, and wisdom. I hope that today has been a little of that training for you, too. So now get out there and dance your way through life.